Welcome to the From Concealment Podcast, the show for firearm enthusiasts who like to shoot, train, carry, and compete. Get ready for some shooting and sight, firearm and accessory reviews, and of course, insight on conceal carry. And now, broadcasting from behind enemy lines in the From Concealment studio, it's Pete Mitchell and Dan Sams.
Hey, Freedom Nation, I'm Pete Mitchell.
And I'm Dan Sams.
And you are listening to the From Concealment Podcast. And this episode is being brought to you by Fast OC. If you are in Orange County, California, behind enemy lines, much like me, and you're thinking to yourself, you know what, I kind of want to get some more training in, maybe join a local competition, I would encourage you to run on over to fastoc.com. Check out their website. They've got great training programs, handgun competitions all the time. In fact, I'm looking forward to, based on when we're recording this, tomorrow night, I'll be doing one of their handgun competitions. I love it.
Nice.
I have fun with it. So I can say no more positive thing other than I like to spend money on gun stuff and gun training and all things firearms related. And they get a chunk of my hard-earned cash, and it's well spent every time. So fastoc.com. Check them out.
Awesome.
But yeah. So, hey, we got some great stuff lined up for you guys on today's podcast. In fact, I'm looking forward to hearing Dan Sams talk about Kent State. Yeah, that's gonna be I think an interesting talk. Before we get there, some recent stats just came out. Now, we do record these guys a few weeks before they actually air on the podcast, just so we can make sure that we've always got one coming out every week and things like that. So these just came out, I believe, this week. It's the FBI's stats for 2018 on murders. And so they've broken it down, and the headline that caught my attention, and I think it's a little bit of a misleading headline. And I have a problem with this. Even when I agree with the position, I don't like misleading people.
Yeah.
And we see that too much on both sides of the political spectrum. Technically, I guess there's more than two sides to the political spectrum, but we see it too much. And so the headline was, FBI stats show 5 times more murder by knives than by rifles in 2018. And so I'll read off some of the stats here just so you guys understand. 2018, according to the FBI, there were 14,123 murders nationwide. Total firearm murders was 10,265. Handguns were the overwhelming majority, 6,603. Rifles, now this includes, of course, the Black Scary rifles as well as your hunting rifle, were 297 of them. And so that's what they're looking at. They're going, okay, there's 297 rifle murders. And then if you were to skip down all the way to knives and cutting instruments, there's 1,515. So you go, okay, so 5 times more than rifles. So knives are more dangerous. And this is where I got to go, okay, but wait a second here. This is why I find this disingenuous. If we look at, again, we keep going down the list here. Okay, shotgun murders, 235. Now, is a shotgun different than a rifle? Well, legally it is, but is it really? I mean,
it's a long barrel gun.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And then we've got other guns. Now, other guns, the reason why there are so many other guns is because now we're creating so many variances that it's not technically a rifle, it's not technically a pistol, it's not, and so it becomes an other. That's why the ATF actually has, an other option for the firearm. So that was 167. But here's where I find it's 5 times more disingenuous, that headline. There's a category here for firearms type not stated. So in other words, where the FBI got the stat from was from all the local and state numbers. And they're saying that 2,963 of them, the type of firearm wasn't stated. Well, that's not small. Like, that's literally just under 30% of all firearm murders. And so to sit there and say, well, we know that rifles are, 5 times, less likely to kill someone, or, whatever they're trying to imply by that, than knives, it's disingenuous, because we have, almost twice as many murders done by firearms that we just didn't know what the type was.
Yeah.
So I find that disingenuous. So that's a problem that I have with the headline. But I still find it very interesting here as we look through the numbers. Okay, yeah, a lot of murders done by firearms. Blunt objects, right? Yep. So clubs, hammers, etc. And we'll see this a lot, guys, right? More people are killed by hammers than by rifles. Well, in 2018, again, if we're just looking at what we know was a rifle, then sure. Yeah, there was. But again, keep in mind, there's almost 3,000 deaths that we don't know what the weapon was. Right. But the blunt objects was 443 murders. Personal weapons, I love this. Personal weapons is hands, feet, fists, etc. Like, what's etc.? I understand hands, fists, feet. I don't know what etc. is.
That's not even going to comment on that.
I know, right? Okay, I don't know. 672. So in other words, hand-to-hand combat. We'll just leave that. They should just call it hand-to-hand combat. Hand-to-hand combat. Okay, there's actually, that's significant. 673. That's more than blunt objects. That's more than shotguns, probably. Who knows, right? Again, firearms not stated. That's 30% that we don't know. A couple that I found really interesting. Statistically speaking, only 5 people were poisoned intentionally, murdered that way in 2018, which, by the way, is down from 15 in 2017. So, much less poison going around. Explosives.
It's because all of the poison control, Pete, like they're just keeping that poison off the shelf,
Exactly. Sure it's now behind the counter. You have to physically go ask for it, and they ask for your date of birth.
You got to get a permit. You got to go through a class. It's a lot harder.
There's a 10-day cooling off period.
There's a 10-day cooling off period. Like, that's how we're really keeping these poisons from happening. Way to go, poison control.
Explosives, 4 people were killed via explosive, which is, I don't know. I've seen so many movies. I figured there was like 4 a day, but apparently not. There's 4 for the whole year for the whole country. Fire, like, that's just a weird way to murder someone. Kind of gnarly, actually. 72 people were killed via fire. Narcotics. Now, this one I find interesting. They literally murdered someone with narcotics. Like, it's not considered an overdose. This is considered a murder. 78 people were murdered with narcotics.
That's really interesting.
Drowning 9 people. I don't really know why that doesn't count under personal weapons, because you got to hold them down. But whatever.
Unless you're chaining their legs or putting a millstone around their neck.
I guess.
Maybe this is a thought through. Maybe it's the old cement shoes thing. Yeah, that's interesting. The numbers give me pause. I'm like, because I have the same kind of questions. Why is this categorized this way and not that way? Even the aggregation of the data, as you already mentioned, there's this other weapons or other firearms. The numbers just kind of get whacked out a little bit because we're not dealing with clear numbers sometimes.
Yeah, and that's 30% is, close enough to 30%. That's a huge number of firearm murders to not know what the weapon was. Now, what's clear is, again, handguns were 6,603. So no matter how you shake it, the majority of murders using a firearm are done with a handgun, because even if all 3,000 weren't stated were rifles, which is statistically it's unlikely, then that still puts handguns as the number one weapon of choice in a firearm murder. And it does say in the little notes here, pushed is included in personal weapons. So hand-to-hand combat, you could push someone to death, meaning downstairs, whatever. So then there were 900 where weapons were not stated, but the weapon was used. So again, could be knife, could be gun, could be hammer, could be, again, hand-to-hand combat, because apparently that's a weapon.
Yeah. Which, again, that gets us to, there was a whole lot of hand-to-hand murders that there's no way you can ban that. What are we going to chop people's hands and feet off?
That kind of makes me think that, to me, I would almost kind of lump that into crimes of passion, right? You get in a fight, you get really pissed with someone, and you get in a fight, and it goes too far, and one person ends up dead. I mean, recently there was a really, really sad case. I can't remember where it was, but I believe it was like a 13-year-old kid was murdered at school when two other kids started a fight and beat him up. And basically, first kid hits him in his head or something, like his face, and the second kid whacks him right on his temple. He falls. His head basically hits, a stair, and it sounds like it probably broke his neck the second he fell.
Oh my gosh! And
then, of course, the first kid comes back and starts wailing on him, not realizing that he's probably already been killed. And so, these kids were, there is no way to say it other than it was there. I would find it pretty much impossible to believe that a 13-year-old has so much malice in their heart they wanted to kill someone. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying I really don't buy it. Right? I think this was, just kids being stupid, getting into a fight, and it having a deadly consequence. Because they got arrested. I know that. And who knows what will happen to them. I mean, I can't even imagine being the parent of the 13-year-old who died. I can't imagine being a parent of, the kid who was part of the fight that killed him, or even the parent of the kid who recorded it on video. I mean, because they clearly knew it was going down. That's why they recorded the whole thing. But
it's interesting, though. These are the kinds of things where you've got a 13-year-old who, they were doing something really bad, and they should know better. But clearly, well, I shouldn't say clearly, but it sounds like they had no idea that they would have been killing this kid.
Right.
Now, with that in mind, man, I think people don't always realize how easy it is to take a shot in a particular part of the body.
Oh, yeah.
It's lights out. There's this, however many, I don't know the stats, but hearing about people that get just one punch in a bar fight, and it's, you think somebody we're just going to exchange jabs, and a guy just hits somebody just the right way, and that's it. I have a friend of mine. He's a pastor. He was a pastor here in Northeast Ohio. He's ministering somewhere else now. But one of the guys in his church got into it with somebody, and one punch. All he did is one punch, and the dude has permanent damage. And my buddy's friend ends up spending a year in jail over it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the guy that got hit had it coming, but then, we're in a crazy world, man.
We are. I mean, I unfortunately, I really love watching the TV show Dateline. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, just like true crime stories, right? I love that kind of thing. And I was watching one last night that was on our DVR, and it's this young girl who gets mixed up with a married guy who's significantly older. I mean, she had to have been like early 20s, maybe 20, 21. Certainly did not look that old, according to her pictures. And the guy who she had the affair with and his wife were both found guilty and sent to prison. Based on what they showed in the Dateline, I actually don't know that I could have found them guilty because I don't think there was enough evidence. Again, but I'm watching a freaking TV show, right? So, who really cares? It's just I like looking at everything they present and going, okay, could I side with that? And there's I couldn't. Like, more than likely, the guy was probably guilty, but I just didn't see, like, the wife, I didn't see enough evidence for her. I think people just didn't like her, and so they voted against her. But the whole time I'm sitting there going, dude, I got a 4-year-old daughter, man, and, like, I see all this stuff, and I'm like, the thought goes through your head, what's going to happen? How do I protect my daughter? How do I make sure that she doesn't become a statistic like this, so easily thrown away by someone? And my son, who's 8 years old, and same thing with him, because the crazy things happen, man. They just happen.
Yeah. But I think part of the answer to that is you're in your kids' lives, like, already, like, just physically being present in the home, staying married to their mother, already protects them from a heck of a lot of stuff, right? They're from my first wife. They're not.
Right. They're from I'm just kidding, guys.
who you happen to still be with by God's grace. But I tell you what, I've been feeling the same things. My wife and I just watched the Surviving R. Kelly documentary series.
Oh, did you?
And it's heavy, and you're watching how, like, this dude just systematic. He had a way about it, like, systematically. And some of these were from, decent homes, these girls, but he had a method of luring them in and whatever. And here I'm the whole time thinking, like, these parents that cannot get to their kids because he's isolated them. And I'm like, at some point I get into, like, as a father, I might get into the whole, like, I will do whatever it takes to free my child, including something that would send me to jail for the rest of my life. Right.
I know.
Like, and so some of this, I'm like, there is a really simple solution to this problem. Why isn't anybody thinking of this? And then I'm like, oh yeah, because this is all happening in Chicago, where unfortunately not many good guys have guns in Chicago. But that whole thing, but it makes me immediately go to, like, protection mode on my kids. Yeah, man. Heavy stuff, man.
It is.
Bums me out.
Boy, we started this one out great, didn't we?
Yeah. Crazy things going on. Well, do you want me to lighten it up a little bit?
Yeah, lighten it up with Kent State, would you? How's that going to happen?
Here's where I can go with this. So at the time we're recording this, I think it was end of last week that Beto O'Rourke made a comment about the Kent State shooting and mentioned about, like, 4 people were shot here, and this is why essentially citizens should not have guns. Completely neglecting the fact that it was, National Guardsmen that had shot people at Kent State. And just a little side note, this is one of the ways in which, this is just straight misinformation, like using a piece of truth, telling it in a completely the opposite way to essentially support the opposite premise. Right? So I just thought it might be worthwhile for us to review a little bit of the history of guns in Kent State, because it should be comical that Beto O'Rourke made this comment, because it's so ridiculous. Unfortunately, people believe him and are like, yeah, we shouldn't have guns. And it's like, well, for crying out loud, the government shot 4 people, and now your solution is to make sure that only the government has guns? Like, right. That's just insane. And so I'd love, if it's cool, I would love to just kind of share some of the history of Kent State. Just full disclosure, I'm in Ohio right now. I'm about an hour away from Kent State. So this is a little bit near and dear to me. But real quick background. First of all, May 4th, 1970, we had this situation where there were Ohio National Guardsmen opened fire on a crowd of protesters that were protesting Vietnam War. So many of you guys know, end of 60s, we're in the Vietnam War. Not everybody remembers, but part of Richard Nixon getting elected was kind of on this promise that he was going to get us out of Vietnam. And up until about April of 1970, the trend seemed to be in a good direction. It's like, all right, maybe he's going to get us out of Vietnam. But then kind of on a sudden, on April 30th, he authorizes a whole bunch of troops to go into Cambodia. Well, that gets kind of tricky because he had not communicated with the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense to do it. He just kind of took this executive order, which, by the way, still retrospectively looks really weird. It was kind of like we had things going a certain way, and without consulting anybody close to him, he makes this big turn. I am not going to put on the deep state, tinfoil hat. But just pointing out this is weird. So people kind of freak out about this. There were already anti-Vietnam protests going on, but you can imagine, like, people were really upset about this. A little side note, like, even Congress kind of came out against Nixon on this thing. Public reaction, though, goes nuts, and there's protests going on all over the country, including at Kent State. The protests at Kent State started on May 1st, which would have been the day after the Cambodian invasion. And some weird stuff starts happening right away because the police were reporting that the protesters were hitting their cars with bottles and stopping traffic and other things like that. As far as I can tell, and I'm not an expert on Kent State, but as far as we can tell, the police were the first ones to make the statement that any of the protesters had done anything related to violence. So nobody else seems to have reported on that other than the police. Again, I could be wrong. I'm not an expert on it, but what we're seeing. And so that allows them to call in reinforcements. So things escalate right away based on the word of the police and what they said happened. So before too long, Mayor Leroy Satram declares a state of emergency and then orders all of the bars in town closed. And so that leads to some assistance from the governor before long. There's more crowds. And so you can kind of see things just keep escalating. And before you know it, the National Guard is sent in. May 2nd, there's rumors that there were radicals making threats. Again, nothing substantiated. So you can imagine there's an accusation that the protesters have done something, which they probably did, but still not substantiated. And then you have some rumors going around that there were radicals making threats. Again, not substantiated, but it allows for everything to escalate. Now, could have been happening. What we do know happened is escalations. So Ohio National Guard gets sent into Kent. Admittedly, at this point, things are out of hand. You've got protesters are burning buildings, and actually the ROTC building was getting burned. Supposedly there was some fights with firefighters trying to put it out. Like, we're in full on, it's a mess at this point, right? And so around the 3rd, things calm down a little bit, but we have like 1,000 National Guard troops at the school. We're not sure who is protesters from the community, who is students, 1,000 National Guards, and then a whole bunch of protesters. And so things get a little tricky because there's a big protest that's scheduled for May 4th. And even though things have calmed down, everybody knows this big protest is coming up. And so they decide, the university officials decide, we're going to just cancel the event, and hopefully that'll calm things down. But you can see everything that everybody did to hopefully escalate or de-escalate or solve the situation didn't work, and everybody gets really upset. And so something happens. Somebody starts throwing rocks at the ROTC people. They herd everybody over a hill and into into the football practice field. And something happens there. There's ROTC people or there's National Guards people there amongst the crowd. Things get really nervous. And so so at this point, it gets kind of tricky. The National Guardsmen retreated out of there and up onto the hillside. And at that point, the witnesses say 28 of them turned around and just opened fire into the crowd. And so by the time it was done, 4 people had died. Serious business. So you can kind of understand, like, things were not healthy. Like, this is not just all peaceful protests. But by most accounts, the National Guardsmen didn't necessarily need to fire on anybody. They chose to, and understandably, some of them might have been in danger. It's not clear, but the bottom line is a whole bunch of people indiscriminately fired into the crowd, and 4 people died. And so Kent State has just kind of been known as this, like, watershed for the Vietnam protests. Everybody all of a sudden is looking at our government and saying, wow, they will kill us over this. And, you know, we're trying to protest an illegal use of force. And what do? They illegally use force against us. So real quick background, all that making sense, by the way. That's a big history lesson that I'm sure not everybody was totally interested in all of it, but gives us an idea of Kent State.
Because of my age, I'm not as familiar with everything that went down with the Vietnam War. So I admit I come from a lack of knowledge on this. But a question that I'd have, not that it would affect anything that you said, but I'm just wondering, were National Guardsmen at all used in the military policing action in Vietnam? And the reason why I'm asking that is I wonder if, because when people are protesting, no matter what side they're on, sometimes they're looking, like, emotions get riled. They're looking to basically get a reaction out of the other side.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if someone went too far, and because remember back in that time, not no one, but people were very vulgar and mean to everyone returning from Vietnam. Yeah. Could someone have said something and, one of the National Guardsmen is like, dude, I had a friend who just died over there or whatever. Yeah. And that's what triggered him. I'm just wondering, and not that again justifies anything. I'm just wondering if maybe that was part of it. I don't know. I don't know enough if National Guardsmen. And keep it in mind, like, they had thrown rocks at them, which does not feel good, is dangerous. I'm not excusing it at all. Right. But we can't look at the protesters and say they were completely innocent. Right. Yeah. We also can say, like, hey, at some point you're calling, you're bringing a tank to a dispute, not a tank. They're like, they're coming to something and using a much bigger hammer than is necessary, arguably. Yeah. But you're right. Well, and like, people would have had family members that had been drafted. Bad things were happening, and I mean, everybody would have had a connection. I mean, everything now, we can all find some connection. I mean, most of us know somebody who is a vet of the current war. Well, it's because they've been going on for forever. It has been going on for a while. I think deployment is less than what it would have been in Vietnam, though. Actually, don't hold me to that. I'd have to recheck the numbers. But crazy stuff. But as we can see, like, this situation is not an argument for only the government having guns. No matter how you cut it, Beto O'Rourke's comment does not stand well. Now, one thing that's worth noting about all this is that ultimately there was a lawsuit against them. So the National Guard was essentially found guilty of either negligence or whatever. They ended up having to pay, because there were several people injured, not just the 4 who died. They ended up having to pay out something like, it was looking at it right now, $675,000. And the Guard actually drafted a statement and said, yep, retrospectively, we messed this up. And so, rough times. Now, fast forward a little bit. So you can imagine that there's all this, like, tension. You have Neil Young writes a song about it, the whole "They're Dead in Ohio." Lots of discussion about these kind of things, big watershed, all kinds of debate, all kinds of things going on. Things have cooled down. People don't, as people have aged and changed now, younger generations, and not everybody knows the details of the story like they used to. But there's still some association with, the Kent State shooting. Interestingly enough, though, there's a pretty firm rule that if you were a student at Kent State, you are not allowed to carry a gun. So do you know about this Caitlin Bennett girl who did her graduation photos with an AR-10? Did you hear about this? I might be a Facebook follower.
You might know about that. So that just fast forwarding a little bit. She knows exactly the story, and she's like, this is exactly why I should be able to carry a gun. And so her Facebook photos, and it's this, like, just cute little girl. She's just graduated from college. She's got not an AR-15, an AR-10 on her back, and then has I think it was a come and take it on her mortarboard, and it's just hilarious. Of course, started a big firestorm, all kinds of debate. She held her own in the debate, which was kind of fun. And then, of course, fast forward to just a couple of weeks ago or last week, where we've got Beto O'Rourke making these comments. It's just a crazy thing. The thing I'm always trying to bring everybody around to is, who was it that says, you never want to let a crisis go to waste or something like that, which is a terrible, terrible thing to say. But man, let me just tell you, gun grabbers will not let a crisis go to waste, even if it happened 40 some years ago. right? And even if they were the perpetrators in it. And so just pointing out that like what we've got right now is candidates on the campaign trail using even that to try to take our guns away.
Well, and see, what I think Beto O'Rourke is doing, and whether or not he realizes it, because, I mean, he knows he's got no chance. Yeah. I mean, even he knows it. But it's like, okay, I'm actually in this thing longer now because I've taken this extreme position. So very much taking a play from the Trump playbook, which is go to the extreme, it'll keep you in the game longer. I mean, people don't remember that his campaign manager's responsibility was to get him to be the number 2 person and, you know, let someone else be the number 1, not realizing that he was going to eventually be the Republican nominee. You know, they were just trying to get him number 2. We just want to get him number 2. That's it. And he just was so crazy that, you know, no one else was speaking his love language. So he got all the votes. But I think what's happening with Beto O'Rourke is he's really laying the groundwork for what the future candidates are going to be able to say, push, and do. And that's why you are going to see more guns taken away, more of our rights infringed upon, until eventually they're going to win, or we're going to have a civil war. We're gonna, And the thing is, I don't know that people are going to be willing to fight over this. I mean, everyone says come and take it, but you know, I don't know. In the end of the day, that's really what they're going to do.
Well, because they're doing it slow, you know.
Yeah.
It's not like Lexington and Concord where they're like, we're coming to take them all today.
Right.
It's and they're raiding one house at a time, right? They're red flagging one house at a time, and it's just bit by bit. And man, just being real on it. Think about like what would we do? Well, if they came for my guns, they're probably going to come in the middle of the night. I know guys that are on SWAT, and they schedule their raids in the middle of the night, right? And so they're going to show up. I would love to say I could defend my home against an intruder. I think I could, given that because an intruder, hopefully I would be able to hear him coming, whatever. If SWAT knocks down my door and runs up my steps, right, they're gonna have me on the ground in 30 seconds, right, before I can get up and even pull my gun out. And what am I going to do, my wife and I, against, you know, a full SWAT stack in the middle of the night, right? So if they're going to come and take my guns that way, I don't have a whole lot of chance. I'm just being real, right? I would love to have some way to alert the Boogaloo Squad to know to come and like take care of business, because now you'll have them surrounded.
The Freedom Squad. The Freedom
Squad, right? But let's just face in facts. Like, it's going to be really hard to respond against red flag stuff in the moment. And so the one by one thing, and so I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just pointing out that like the response is going to have to be a different response. But what it can't be is, okay, I'm going to turn in my guns now. Right. That's not even a legal way to go about it. Like, I always remind everybody, like, you know, our rule of law is the Constitution. Any law that's in violation of the Constitution is not a valid law, and you have a duty to disobey it. Not everybody gets excited about that, but
Right.
So best thing we can do, make it hard for them to come and get them, make them not want to come and get them, and educate people, man. You know, I don't have a whole lot of influence on what a particular politician is going to do, even if it's my candidate, right? But I've got influence over my neighbor. I can have a conversation and get them to have an understanding of guns and why it's valuable to have them, why it benefits him.
Except I've heard stories about your neighbor. He loves guns.
My neighbor
and is great at shooting.
Yeah, my neighbor is awesome. Yeah, actually, a fun story as we're finishing up here that I can tell you. I come out, my wife and I have this Ruger 1022 that I shoot more than anything, and my wife and I are out shooting. We're having a good old time, but we're trying to sight in this this rifle, and we've got a target at 50 yards. So we're not even, you know. There's different math that you got to do at 50 yards, right? But we got an MOA target out there. My neighbor comes out, and he has been sipping on Shine, right? And he comes out, and he's like, listen, man, I can't shoot because I've already had a little bit to drink. And I'm like, no kidding. And he's like, I'll help you sight this in. He looks down that rangefinder, has my wife fire off one round. He looks back, kind of leans back and looks up to the sky, does the math in his head. And like, he's telling her how many clicks down, how many clicks up, and bam, had it on the money. And I'm like, man, this dude can come out drunk and do MOA math faster than I can sober. And so that makes him a hero.
That's so awesome.
He's a good dude. Yeah. It's a good stuff, man.
That's cool. Well, hey, I appreciate you sharing that Kent State stuff. I think that's great information. In fact, I think that's the direction we need to do with more of our episodes is go over the history and help people to understand the reason why we have this right protected by the Constitution. Because remember, the Constitution didn't give us the right. It merely protects the right.
Yeah.
It was already a natural right that we possessed.
That's right, man. Heck yeah.
Yeah.
So, So, history. I've got a couple of ideas on that. We'll have to talk about these. The other thing is, if any listeners want to write in, jump on the website, shoot us a message, whatever, we'd love to have some suggestions on a couple of things you'd like to know some gun history on. Yeah. We could talk about the M1s. We could talk about the Colt 306s. There's all kinds of fun stuff we could do.
We could also talk about great movies with great gun scenes. I have a buddy.
Yes.
I'm like, hey, have you seen Sicario? And he goes, no. And I'm like, let me pull up Sicario for you real quick. Here, watch the scene at the border. Watch. And then Wind River. I'm like, same guy wrote Wind River. I go, let's go to the gun scene in that one.
That's awesome.
He's like, I got to go see those movies. I'm like, yes, you do.
Yeah,
yes, does everybody. They're great.
It's awesome. Yeah. It makes me want to shoot guns. Good stuff, man. Well, you want me to close this out here?
Do it. Yep.
All right, so we got to talk about Lake Erie Arms. I'm going to recommend everybody hit up learms.net. Lake Erie Arms in Northeast Ohio feature all kinds of cool guns. We've mentioned this. If you want to have parts for your AR, you want to do a custom Glock, or you want just your standard Henry rifle, whatever, we've got it all, but it's unlike anybody else around. One of the cool things about Lake Erie Arms, though, is they like to give away free information. So if you go to learms.net, we've got some video series / educational emails and other stuff, everything from AR builds and things you can learn about that, totally free, sign up. We've got stuff on a first-time gun buyer, what you need to look for when you're buying your first gun, stuff on CCW, stuff on even like female gun buyers. We know that a lot more women are getting into guns. We think it's amazing, and so we're providing some information on how to get into that, what to do. Hopefully, great stuff. I know it's great stuff because I helped put that content together. Check out aliarms.net, and you will not regret it.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for listening in. We'll be back next week with another great episode.
All right. Take care.
You've been listening to the From Concealment Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Dan Sams. Be sure to tune in next week for more gun talk. Also, check out the From Concealment website for more shooting-related goodness at FromConcealment.com.